Venom: The Last Dance is finally out in theaters after his solo debut in 2018, and now I gotta say this is probably one of my favorite movies within the trilogy, or at least better than Let There Be Carnage. These movies, while lacking certain quality points, I feel provide a source of entertainment, or at least funniness within them that makes them at least worth watching and talking about in this video. The last time we'd seen these pair of goofballs was in 2021, by the way, when Eddie Brock had already paired up with the symbiote and fought his offspring, Carnage, played by Woody Harrelson, in a bad movie. But I know some people like it, and that's okay. I'm happy for you. I'm gonna do what I do best when it comes to these types of mid-tier movies and talk about things or moments that I like, and there are gonna be full spoilers from this point on, so I wouldn't even continue from this point if that's something y'all are worried about. But without further ado, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, it helps out the cause over here on my channel, and let's see what makes these movies worth the watch.
Eyes, lungs, pancreas. So many snacks, so little time.
Venom and Eddie have had a wild journey within the year that they spent in this universe, from their original bonding to one another, dying, having a baby essentially, moving to the MCU and back, and eventually rounding out with a cross-country chase within their universe. We see Eddie and Venom on the run basically from everything in this movie. He has the cops, the government, secret military operations, all looking for him, but the icing on the cake has to be Venom's daddy.
Tell me, who is your daddy and what does he do? Get it?
Now, Venom's daddy Venom's creator. For those who don't know, Noel is the Keenan Black. He created the Clintar race and basically was kind of banished into this imprisonment in the comics until he finally broke free, and it started a whole ordeal of things. That's all I'm going to tell you. But Noel has finally sensed his chance of release from the symbiote imprisonment and has sent his xenophages, these monster-like creatures, to bring back the codex within Venom and Eddie. Now, the reason they have this codex inside them is because back in Venom 1 in 2017, Riot had stabbed and technically killed Eddie, but Venom brought him back to life, further cementing a permanent bond between both of them. Now, whether this codex within the movie has any sort of connection to the codex within the comics, I'd probably say not, just a coincidental name or an homage. Sony. It's Sony. But these xenophages hunt down the pair, and it gets really tricky as Venom can't take on his humanoid form without alerting these hunters to their location, which is an interesting choice to take for their last movie in this trilogy. And in some ways for this pair, it's supposed to be their last dance, but around the end of the film, this is where I think certain aspects actually start to pop off. And listen, this movie is not without its flaws like the previous two, but if you go into it looking for a fun and goofy time, I think you're honestly going to come out with less hatred or distaste than most of us comic book enthusiasts within the community. It's definitely a fun, casual film, that's for sure. One of my first and favorite parts about this movie, though, is the emotional beats it hits with Eddie and Venom. We take these two bonded characters throughout the span of 3 movies, and I won't say it always hits the hardest, but there's also a deep connection between these two, or at least within the last installment, they really tug on the heartstrings for these characters. A highlight scene has to be when they're both traveling in the van with Rise, Ivan's character, and it's towards the nighttime where we see Ivan's character is asleep while his son's kind of explaining to a tired and worn out Eddie that he doesn't want to meet or see aliens because he thinks they're scary. And it's a touching moment because you have Eddie trying to comfort him, and he gives a sweet little lie where he's like, aliens don't exist, even though he knows that they do. But it's the thought in the gesture that really kind of takes it the long way. Because following up after that, Venom lets Eddie know that he would have made a great father, all things considered, that through the last 2 movies, one of the subplots has been Eddie's life has been falling apart, whether it's his job or his relationship with Anne. And further adding disruption once he had become bonded with Venom, Venom acknowledging that they maybe could have had a normal life once upon a time with each other. Just kind of a sweet gesture, And a little side tangent, I think this is where I like this movie more than the Let There Be Carnage, because Carnage one kind of treated them like they were a couple, where this one kind of treats them as a whole, like one person with 2 consciences. But this small moment for these two not only shows the progress in their relationship, because they've often bumped heads with how they treat certain things. There's a lot of bickering and tug-of-war of responsibility, but when you take this moment and pair it up with the final scene of the film, it really does round it out in certain aspects. However, I will touch back on this point towards the last section of this video, but for now I'm gonna go segue into one of the coolest fucking wildest sequences out of all of these movies.
Holy shit!
Alright, baby! So, we've seen a lot of things in this universe, Carnage, Riot. Well, basically, those two things, besides the primary stuff, right? But I tell you, when I was fully brought to a teary point when we saw a small army of symbiotes fight together against the Xenophage assault, oh, baby, I'm telling you, it had to be one of the most iconic points in this trilogy. I have loved the idea of symbiotes as a child and my early comic book life, so when you told an 11-year-old me that not only does Venom exist, right, but other colorful versions of him, I'm sold. Like, I'm there. I'm in the seat, And that was one of the things I was really waiting for this entire movie as it progressed. I was like, please show us them. Please show us Scream at least. Just show us all of them. Shit, I bought this package a couple months ago with this one storyline just because it had the symbiotes on it. Like, doesn't this look kind of decent though? Doesn't it? Seeing all sorts of symbiotes taking form from anyone that's nearby with different aspects with them too was super fun for me. Seeing a fire symbiote, you had Lasher, Phage, and Toxin, man, my boy Toxin. Now, I know a lot of people will and can be mad about how they used him in this movie, from being designed and recolored into a kind of a greenish blue look from his original red and black. I get it, I love the red and black design, trust me. Red top, black bottom. And he was killed off pretty quick too, So I can understand the pushback from the fans on this, but in defense, I will say he was pretty cool for the original take they did with his character.
Life is good, but it can be better.
And he never fully stood in his form. He was always like moving around, kind of like flowing through the air and stuff, especially around the ceiling all creepily. I think that was kind of cool actually. That looked pretty cool. But seeing all these symbiotes in a stance and even merge into like a hybrid symbiote was a really cool moment for me. I am surprised we were able to get pretty lengthy scenes with all these characters because 1, Sony. 2, CGI nowadays seems to be a very hit or miss when it comes to the length and time on screen. And 3, Sony again. Lasher was a fun choice they had made within the movie and her use of time, and she was really all about that life, fighting the Xenophage with all of her might. It's definitely sad to see all the symbiotes kind of bite the dust, or so I think, because Strickland stepping in the remnant goo from one of those deceased hosts, you oughta think they're dead, right? Strickland was a pretty good character, all things considered, being in this kind of goofy movie where it's wild and he's a super strict character. He had some pretty good moments, whether that was shooting Eddie when he had taken over the project or explosive sacrifice towards the end when he blew up the acid tanks. But moments like this are pretty good or interesting to see, along with how use of Venom's hopping from animal to animal after seeing him only really take hosts that consist of humans prior to this movie. Now, I do want to return back to the first point of discussion in the moments Venom and Eddie have, especially within the end of this movie. We get into this point of congestion with the pair surrounded by the Xenophages as they're portaling in from Knowles' void and surrounding the two whilst in a helicopter stuck. Venom decides in order to save, let's say, the universe, he heads back into his true form with Eddie and starts to attract a group of hunters while walking closer and closer towards the acid tanks. And the visuals we see in the scene is him growing in size, surrounding himself around the Xenophages, getting big and gigantic, was just super badass, man. But in the end, he ends up spitting out Eddie while letting him get his chance to live. And it's that touching moment where he lets Eddie know that this will not be the end for them. Whether they make another movie appearance or not, it kind of leaves off on a sad point though for these two, because we've been with these two for so long, and you've always been able to hear Venom throughout the mind of Eddie, so when it finally comes to an end, and he wakes up and he's not able to hear him anymore, it's kind of a bittersweet feeling. Making that sacrifice to save a world that was never his, he takes that ultimate role solidifying that in this universe, he was the lethal protector. And no matter how good or bad their time together was, they were always in the right mindset, even in the hardest of times. It's definitely not the clearest path or the best interpretation of these two's relationship, but for an on-screen version, I think Venom was the friend we made along the way. And love it or hate it, you gotta give it to Sony somewhat for sticking with this IP, knowing their track record with their movies and commitment. But my last small points for this movie is, where do we go from this point on with these characters and the MCU. Now for starters, it's clear that the symbiote still exists within the MCU. I don't think the trailer really clarifies that in a good way, because you could say, oh, well, why should they do that? That would be a spoiler. And my response to that is, it doesn't hurt, because a lot of us had that confusion, but it clears it up. It exists in both universes now. Second, I don't think this universe is necessarily over within itself, because Eddie is still alive, and clearly there are some indications that Venom could still be alive out there as well somehow, especially dealing with the idea of cockroaches surviving mass extinction events whilst showing in this mass rubble in Area 51 you have a cockroach by a test tube, so who knows? Who knows? And finally, what's next with Noel? I think that Noel's definitely got a future when it comes to a threatening presence within the Spider-Man universe. Whether we see him show up in Spider-Man 4 or in another Sony movie, who knows? But I did like the little setup and the screen time he did get. A lot of people are like, oh, he doesn't really have any screen time. I think it's fine. I really didn't need more than what they gave us. We know that he seems to exist within a plane that is between realities because of the empty void surrounding him, as well as symbiotes having a hive mind from other multiverses. So, we'll just have to see. Near the end, I think the Venom trilogy is messy, goofy, flawed, for a film presence in modern day movies. But this is okay, you know, it doesn't have to be the biggest thing, and I'd rather have it at least provide me with some form of enjoyment with Tom Hardy playing both Eddie and Venom than some super, stuck-up, strict thing. But it still surprises me that we've gotten this far with these characters in film, and yeah, it sucks we've never seen him get the white spider symbol on his chest, web swing, or even have some resemblance to Spider-Man, even though in this third movie he did hang upside down and talk for a little bit, so I'll give them points for that. It takes its own identity, though, within this universe, whether Sony knew what they were doing along the way, or just kind of pieced it together as they went. I really hope you guys did like this movie and this trilogy, and, you know, my video as well, too, just kind of touching base on the points that I liked from this. And I know I haven't done a video like this since, I don't know, The Flash, so without further ado,
I will see you in the next video. Jump. Pussy.